Turn off the light. It's kind
Okay, we're live. Lindsay just got up to turn off the... Lindsay, go turn off the light. You want to turn off the light. Go turn off the light. I'll hold down the fort till you get back. We are live. And, you know, sometimes we figure out the lighting before we go live, and sometimes we don't, and that's okay. It's all good.
that up on me. Okay, I think it's better with the light.
It's all good. Okay. Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Girardian Virtual Bible Study. This is our fourth week, and I finally got the name right.
Good job.
I know. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's fun, and I will continue to get the name right from here on out. I promise.
Good for you.
Although I might break that promise a couple times. I don't know, but it is all good. Lindsay, how are you doing today?
Well, we went live a couple seconds ago, and I wasn't even here, and I kind of feel that way. I feel scattered and. I can't believe it's almost Christmas, and the only thing that makes me not wish it were the weekend is because the weekend will be closer to Christmas, and I want Christmas to come, but I do want to feel more ready than I do right now when it does. So,
the good news is that Jesus is coming, whether we are ready or not. And it will happen, and it will be good. And Joel is with us. Hi, Joel. Joel is with us all the way from, oh man, Joel, I know that you're in Europe, Estonia. Joel is in Estonia, and Joel is studying theology and political theology. He's taking a class. I had a really great conversation with him a while ago over Facebook video or something, I forget. And we are going to be talking about, I'm glad Joel is here because we are going to be talking about politics. These, people often want to separate religion and politics, and I get it, but the Bible just doesn't allow us to do it, especially at Christmas time. It's so political. Why? Because there's a spirituality to our politics. And, I often say the Bible, there are passages in the Bible that says that like the whole earth and everything in it belongs to God. That includes our politics. God cares about our politics.
It does.
And we see that in the readings this morning. Joel says, hey guys, I'm finally able to join live. Yeah, Estonia, that's right. Good. Awesome.
Thank you for joining us, Joel. I've been so moved by all your comments and just thinking about them, and really, really appreciate your support and your presence here today.
Joel is on point, and I will bring in any comments that you have, Joel, because they're a lot of fun and insightful and stuff. But let's get into these readings. These are the readings for Christmas Eve. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
As a pastor, I should know this. This is for Christmas Eve, yes. And I have studied them, and you have studied them, and hopefully we can, gosh, how political are these readings? I'm just going to get to Isaiah chapter 9, verses 2 through 7. And just to set this up a little bit, Isaiah is writing in the 8th century when the Assyrian Empire is basically taking over the world through like horrendous acts of violence and conquest. And Isaiah here is talking in the midst of this. The Assyrian Empire is knocking on the door, and Isaiah is trying to give a word of hope for the future. And here it is. I'll just go ahead and read it. Isaiah says, "The people who walk in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nations. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you, as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressors, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this.
Mhm.
That's it. That's the reading.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a powerful reading. As I was preparing for this, I was reading James Allison, who says that when we read this passage, we should not think of it as some poor souls living in the past who lived in darkness and now we are the people of the light. We need to see ourselves in the darkness, and we need to see the light that's coming to us. We need to see that it's continually opening our eyes, and that we are still gradually awakening to that light. So the light has been shining for 2,000 years, but we still remain in darkness, and we are just still continuing to open our eyes the way that, in the morning when the light shines, it's bright, but it's still dark in your mind, and you have to get used to it, and you have to wrap your head around it.
Daniel Kingstrom is with us. So Danielle, thank you for being here. And if anybody else has a comment, if you have a comment, go ahead and put that in there and we will bring you in. The light has been shining for 2,000 years, but this passage says that the light has been shining for 2,700 years. Ever since the time of Isaiah, the light of God is coming in. And what is the darkness? Girard says that the fundamental problem with humanity, that faces humanity, is our own violence. And when we are violent with one another, this is the cause of our own destruction. And so there's this passage, there's this part of what Isaiah is saying here where it says that it's very violent. It's very violent. And remember, it's the Assyrians who are knocking on the door and the violent conquest. And it says that for all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. This is like the peace that Isaiah is talking about. This goes back to Isaiah chapter 2, right? Where he says that the swords will be turned into plowshares and the pruning hooks and all of the weapons of war will be transformed. Well, here the boots are going to be burned, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is looking, while the Assyrians are knocking on the door about to destroy everything, Isaiah comes in with words of hope. Right. Someday all of this violence is going to end, and even our own boots of war are going to be burned in the fire.
Yes, absolutely. And we've talked about this fire before and how the image of the fire just by itself has been misunderstood for so long. And here we have an image, the language is very powerful, right? It's language of power. You have a whole people awakening to this light, and then you've got the image of breaking the rod of the oppressor, throwing the boots and the bloodied garments into the fire, and it sounds so powerful. It sounds so majestic, and but it's not talking about hurting anybody. It's not talking about violence. It uses very violent imagery, but it subverts violence by, God doesn't burn the people. The people will not be fuel for the fire. It's their boots and their bloodied garments. It's what they use to take themselves into war that will be burned away. And
Yeah, and I want to make 2 points about that, and maybe we should move on to Luke. But when Isaiah is trying to look for a sign of hope as this army is coming on them, and if I were in Isaiah's day, I would want Isaiah to point to another military ruler or a big soul, like our best soldier in all of Israel, to say, okay, here's our hope. Right? We're going to defeat the bad guys with our own military. But who does Isaiah point to?
a child.
A vulnerable baby.
Yes, exactly.
Right? This is how Isaiah and the whole Bible is flipping our world upside down and inside out. Your hope is not in a big warrior. Your hope is in a vulnerable baby. That is where you find God in the world, in the most unexpected, weak places.
Yes.
Total mindfuck. Now,
I was going to make that point when we got to Luke, but
good. We'll make it there too, because Luke is part of this whole, like Isaiah and Luke, they're making the same point. And so this is one of the really important things when Christians are dealing with these passages in what we call the Old Testament. It's not that Jesus is going against his Jewish tradition. It's not that this is something radically and totally new. It's that this is grounded in the Jewish tradition. Jesus is formed by this tradition. And so when Christmas comes, it's important for Christians to know that this is all what God is doing for the last 3,000, 4,000 years of biblical history. The other point that I want to make is that some people could interpret this as, well, the baby's going to grow up and he's going to enact justice in the world, right? Because it says he will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness. And so then people will say, oh, there it is. There's the violence. But justice in the Jewish tradition, in the Bible, especially for the prophets, justice is about meeting the needs of the poor and the weak and the vulnerable, the marginalized, the widows and the orphans. That is primarily what justice is about in the Hebrew Bible. It's not primarily about punishment. It's about bringing wholeness and restoration to the world, especially for those who are on the margins.
And the thing about that is that those who are on the margins and vulnerable and poor are precisely the first to be trampled in war. And not only by enemies, but by the mobilization to war to defeat the enemy. What we do for defense and protection hurts the vulnerable. We continually sacrifice the weakest among us in the name of defense. And I mean, that's going on today in the world where we, I think Eisenhower said it best in his Cross of Iron speech, that every warship launched, is every gun fired, every bullet, and even every drop of oil that contributes to these machines is a theft from those who are hungry and go without food, and those who are cold and shivering and go without shelter and clothing. So the boots that will be burned for the fire are not just the enemy's boots. They are the boots of people mobilizing against the enemy. Because to the people dying, to the people who are dying, it's all the same. It's the people who, the money that is taken from them to launch wars and the money that's put into machines that fire upon them, it all kills.
Yep.
And God's gonna take all that away, take away all these weapons and all this. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So let's go to Luke chapter 2. And Luke, the last couple of readings, Luke gets political right away. In Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 20, Luke likes to drop names of historical figures. So he says, in those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's 20 verses. You can go read it. We'll just try to summarize it as we talk about it. But there is part of the issue is that whether or not this literally happened, or if because there's no evidence that Emperor Augustus had all of this registration happen so that he could tax people. There's no historical evidence of it besides what's happening here in Luke. But that question put aside, because Luke is telling a larger truth that's happening in here in the story. So what do emperors, political leaders do? They tax people in order to create peace, Roman peace. And how did Rome keep the peace? Through military conquest, just like the Assyrians. They went out. The Assyrians went out. The Roman Empire went out. Every empire goes out in order to try to make peace for their empire. Which means that if you are getting in the way of their peace, it's not very peaceful for you. So peace for the Roman Empire meant conquest and violence and death for other people.
Yes. Yeah. And again, I'm thinking about James Allison, who says that we read this in light of Easter, in light of, the death and resurrection of Jesus. So if it weren't for his death and resurrection, we wouldn't care about the story of his birth. So we read his birth in light of what we know he will become. So we know that he is going to be one to save us from violence and death. And we read that knowledge back into his birth story. So here's the Emperor Augustus and the governor, and they're taking taxes, and they're, with their decrees, they're moving people around to get them to their hometowns to be counted. And, they are these powerful people who have this authority to literally move the world at their whim. But in the midst of all that power and, I snap my fingers, you do this, and I wave my arm and you do that. Here comes this child born in the middle of nowhere with no room and no space. And, there's this utter hopelessness, utter powerlessness in the, we read about who the powerful people are. And then we have a spotlight shown on this completely vulnerable, helpless infant, and we take our story from there. And we wouldn't know about this infant if it weren't for reading backwards. But the light of Easter shines that spotlight on all those dark places where helplessness is born in the darkness. And it shows us to see those lights as significant and beautiful. So something about the utter helplessness and, complete vulnerability of a baby. And I know he wasn't really born in the winter, but that just makes the story even more, like, it adds to the story to picture a child shivering in the cold, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It adds to the vulnerability of it. And something about having a child. Adam, you're a parent, and I'm a mom, and I'm just thinking about how the utter helplessness of a baby just forces the love to pour from you. I'm thinking about that right now. Maybe because I'm not, instead of studying this for hours and hours like I do sometimes, I was working on a project for my children, and I feel a little bit I feel a little bit less than prepared, but the idea that that my children just turned my life and my priorities around. That's what they do. And you just never know how much you can love until it is just compelled from you. And it's not like it's something you resist, something you fight. It compels you in the best sense of your word, like all of your senses, all of your thoughts, everything is just automatically directed to supporting this new life. And I think if we all remember the love that pours from us when we see a newborn child, I think the world would be a much better place. These thoughts haven't really found words in my head yet, but yeah.
Well, one of the things that Jesus came to show us is that we are children of God. We are all loved by God as if God was our mother. And you talk about the resurrection, the cross and the resurrection, and how James Allison points us to that. There's this great tradition in early Christianity that says that Jesus is our mother, and he births a new way of being into the world while he's on the cross. And, birth, I've never given birth, but you can speak to this. I've seen it, and it's beautiful, but it's not pretty. It's painful, and it's bloody. And when Jesus is on the cross, he's in pain and he's stabbed and there's blood pouring out of him. And Mary has, there's blood pouring out of Mary. And this is part of we gloss over the really human bloody aspect of a lot of these stories. And that is what's happening in this birth narrative. Mary is a nobody, but she's giving birth to God in the world, the one who at least shows us what God is doing in the world. And it is not easy. It is not altogether fun, but it is important, and it can cost you something, right? It can cost Mary her reputation. It can cost Joseph his reputation too. There's this great quote, I forget who said it, that says, "Be like Jesus, and hang out with sinners and tax collectors and everybody that the religious people say that you shouldn't hang out with."
Yeah.
Right? Because this is going to, like Mary, it may cost you your reputation. And that's what part of Christmas is about. It's bloody. It's birthed something new and beautiful into the world. And we see this in the next passage. I want to move on to the shepherds, because the shepherds are really great too, because shepherds we have this kind of idyllic view of shepherds, but shepherds in the first century and before the first century and afterwards are not people that you would want to associate with. They are like the ruffians. They're like the people who can't find jobs in town. And so they have to go off and deal with the animals and get dirty with the animals and deal with very human stuff like animal poop. So they're stinky. They're not fun to be around. But they even have a role to play in this too. They are on the outskirts, and they are brought into the family of God.
You think about it, and in the notes that I was looking over, Gil Bailey said that they were like the bikers of our day. I've heard that they are also that they could also be criminals. Like shepherds are not just the bikers, but they could also be like the criminals, the people that nobody wants to be around. I'm not saying anything against bikers. I'm just saying that it's an image of toughness. Yes. And when you think about it, part of their job was to stay up at night and, if necessary, chase away and beat away the wolves. I mean, think of how tough that is, really. So we have this image of them, and then they're terrified. So these are tough people, terrified by the voice of the angels, not just the image of the angels. And most images don't do this justice, because I think the angels were a lot scarier looking in real life than than our little cherubs who play the angels make them out to be. But yeah, it's a terrifying sight.
No, you're right. You're right. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest." You know the rest. But the multitude of heavenly hosts refers to an army. This is the army of the angels. And what does this army do? It doesn't do what human armies do. They come together and they sing glory and praise to God. They're not about conquest. They're about singing glory and praise to the one who is coming into the world to show us a new and different way. It's a subversion of human violence and human armies. This is what the heavenly hosts, the army of the heavenly hosts, is about. It's about singing praise of love in the world.
Yeah, no, and I think about the image, and especially when you said they may even be criminals. I mean, some of them may be criminals. I think, if you have been so marginalized by your society that your main work is out in the fields at night with the sheep chasing away wolves, when you see God coming to you, I mean, your first instinct, it's a terrifying image, but your first instinct might be like, oh crap, this is it. I'm done. I'm dead. Like everyone else has pushed me away, and now I can't even get any peace in this field. And now there's God. I'm dead. I'm going to die because, what
God is against me because everybody else is against me too.
Exactly. And that wasn't the message they received. They received the message that someone was for them, but who that someone was, not someone big and tough who would go out and fight on their behalf, but a vulnerable child. Mm-hmm. So, the love that they found, wasn't this big armed force that was, it was a vulnerable child who would draw the love out of them and give them love in return. And there's something so beautiful about that, and so subversive, so counter to the ways that we think peace and justice must be.
And hey, here's another cool thing that happens. Like the shepherds, like these people on the outskirts, these bikers or criminals or whatever, they show up to Joseph and Mary. And how did Joseph and Mary respond? Not with fear. Like I would be afraid of these guys. I would say, man, at least you stink and go away. My newborn baby is here and I don't want him to get any diseases. They welcome these people in, and then they say these wonderful good news, and Mary treasures these words in her heart.
Yeah. I mean, you can see how the ripples are just changing humanity from that beginning, so that you're right. I mean, our instinct when we have a child is to push away the dirty people. I mean, my children were born in New York City, and I didn't want to take them on the subway. And everyone rides the subway. Yeah. There's nothing against that. I rode the subway all the time, and that was the only way to take them places. But I was afraid of the germs and those are legitimate fears, but they're associated with fears of people and just, these barriers that we put up in our hearts against others, and you see them tumbling down in this story.
Yeah, you see like who are the people that we fear today? Immigrants, illegal immigrants, right? I mean, we're so deathly afraid of them. And what does God continually come and tell people? Don't be afraid. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be afraid of me. You don't have to be afraid of the shepherds who are coming in. You don't have to live in fear because God is fundamentally on your side. Isaiah says the same thing. Yes, the Assyrians are knocking on your door. Isaiah says they may come and they may conquer all of us and kill us, but guess what? Death doesn't have the last word because there's a baby being born, and God is about life and not about death.
Mm-hmm.
That's Easter, that's Christmas, that's all of the Judeo-Christian message in a nutshell, I think, right there. God is not about death, but about life.
Mhm. Yes. Yes. Amen.
All
And
right, go ahead.
I think we got it. I mean, there's so much more to say, of course. I mean, I was going to
Oh,
say
yeah.
this is about to become a refugee, and they're about to rely on the help and kindness of others, and they're about to go back into the land of Egypt to hide out where God told them never to return again because those were their oppressors. And it doesn't mean avoid these people. It means avoid this way of oppressing. And there's so much more, of course. I mean, this is the beginning and the end and everything in between. This is, but we don't have the time to do everything. So we can be like Mary and ponder these things in our hearts now.
Yes. And this is our last Girardian virtual Bible study of the year. We will be back in January, back and better than ever. It's going to be awesome. And we will go through the year. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and for your comments. And I hope that you have a blessed Advent. We've got about 5 days left of Advent. So ponder these things in your hearts during Advent. And I hope that you have a very Merry Christmas, too.
I hope. Blessed Advent and Merry Christmas to everyone.
The Christmas season goes from the 24th or the 25th. I never know exactly when the day is.
Right.
Let's call it the 25th, and it goes for 12 days. So that's when Christmas really starts. And I've often thought that if people wanted to be really hardcore, that you would wish people a Merry Christmas from the 25th all the way to the 6th or the 7th or whatever it is, whatever day Epiphany is.
Yes.
That would be really countercultural.
Yes. But we will not be back until January 9th. So.
Oh, okay.
I don't think. I mean.
Well, anyway, everybody, Merry Christmas from the 25th to the 7th. And that is the real war on Christmas, everyone, starts on the 26th when people stop wishing one another a Merry Christmas. So if you really want to be countercultural, especially with our consumer Christmas that goes from October to the 25th, if you really want to be countercultural, wish people Merry Christmas from the 25th to the 6th or the 7th. Right?
Keep wishing everyone a Merry Christmas.
Yes. We'll see how that goes. Awesome. Okay. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you in the new year. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.